Much. I am so thrilled to be here with you all in this virtual space today. I want to take a moment just to acknowledge where I'm coming to you from today. So I am on what's known as Treaty 7 territory. This is the traditional home of the Stoney Nakoda, the Blackfoot, and the Tsuut'ina First Nations people. You might know this place a little bit better as beautiful Banff National Park in Alberta. I am very grateful to live and to work and to play on this land, on this stolen land, and recognize, my piece as a colonizer on this land. This is one of many things that I would encourage you to do in your own, steps toward truth and reconciliation in Canada, to maybe notice and check into what traditional lands you reside on. Of course, it's one step in reconciliation. There's so much more to be done, but one small step I can do today. Today, I am really thrilled to be able to share with you how we can use the tools and the techniques of mindfulness, which you may have heard this word a lot in the last few years. It's certainly a buzzword, but how we can actually implement these tools to enhance our ability to grow personally, to grow professionally, and to be resilient through our challenges and lead effectively. I want us today to be able to practice lots of mindfulness techniques. While mindfulness is a buzzword in our society today, I think very few people actually understand what it is, and even fewer people are practicing it. So I wanted us to kick off this session with even just a short little bite-sized practice of mindfulness so that we can maybe be a little bit more present together for the time we're spending together today. So what I'd like you to do is to just notice the way you're currently sitting. And I'd like you to sit up a little bit taller. Mindfulness doesn't have a ton to do with the body, but I think our chiropractors and our physios would be happy with us if we sat up a little bit taller in our spine. You might uncross your legs and plant your feet directly on the ground if that's possible, where you are right here. And the invitation here is for just about a minute to close your eyes and listen to my instructions for a little mindful moment. As you close your eyes, just allow your body to become still. And I want you to see if you can turn your attention to any thoughts that are currently happening in your own mind. Just notice where your mind is right now. Is it fully present listening to my instructions? Is it distracted? Is it curious? Is it skeptical? Is it thinking about the meeting you just came out of? Is it anticipating something that's going to happen today or later on in the future? What is the state of your mind right in this moment? And let's now take 3 breaths. You're not going to breathe any differently than you normally would, but you're going to let your mind be incredibly present for those breaths. Watching the breath as it comes into your body and out. Paying complete and full attention to the feeling of breathing in the present moment. Taking that final, most thoughtful, most focused, most mindful breath. Then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So I'll encourage you throughout our session today to pop into the Q&A, ask questions, and even pop into the chat. You might even pop in there right now and just reflect on maybe what you noticed was happening in your own mind in that little moment. Was your mind distracted? Was it focused? Was it curious? Was it skeptical? And really, those states of mind are going to affect the way you engage in our session today. This is so key, this piece of self-awareness that we're going to talk about. Self-awareness of our own mind really changes the way we show up to any scenario. So why would we do that? Let's kind of unpack. Why would we take some valuable time out of our day? Even a couple minutes are really valuable, I know, to a lot of you. Why would we pause this session to take a couple minutes to practice that mindfulness technique? Why is that important? Well, I want to frame up its importance in terms of a story. Some of you may have heard this story before. It's a story about two lumberjacks. And these two lumberjacks, every day, they would start their mornings at the same time, they would end their days at the same time, and they would chop wood all day long. And they would chop exactly the same amount of wood every single day. Now, this might not seem strange, but the one piece that really makes a difference is the fact that one of the lumberjacks every day would take a break for an hour. He would put down, his pile of wood, he would stop everything and he would leave for an hour every day and he would come back. Yet still the two lumberjacks would chop the same amount of wood every single day. So this went on for days, for weeks, for months, until the other lumberjack just had enough of it. And finally, one day he couldn't handle it anymore and he stopped chopping wood and he looked at the other lumberjack and he said, "I don't get it. We both start at the same time every day. We both finish at the same time every day. We both chop the same amount of wood, yet you, every single day without fail, you take off for an hour. I don't see you. I don't know where you go. What are you doing during that hour?" Well, the other lumberjack paused what he was doing and looked up and just casually, looked at the guy and he just said, "Oh, it's really, actually really simple. It's not a secret or anything." He goes, I go home and I sharpen my axe. I go home and I sharpen my axe. I want you today to consider that practicing mindfulness for anyone, but especially for someone in a leadership role, is like sharpening your metaphorical axe to help you become a more strategic leader. Mindfulness might not be the big skills that we think about we need to hone to be a leader, but it's a foundational skill. Like building a house. If you build a house without a foundation, it's not going to last very long. If you build your leadership skills without this foundation of mindfulness, you're missing out on something really crucial. So let's dive in now. I want to share today the 3 ways. There's more ways, but these are 3 important ways that, to me, mindfulness really helps us to become a good leader. What I know is that folks that are mindful leaders have more self-awareness and more self-knowledge. In fact, self-awareness has been cited as the most important capability for leaders to develop, according to an author of an MIT article. Successful leaders know their strengths, and they use this knowledge to boost those strengths or compensate for them with support. This is self-awareness. Another study also found that self-awareness impacts a company's or an organization's bottom line. In a study of the stock performance of almost 500 publicly traded companies, this study found that companies with a strong financial performance tended to have employees with a higher level of self-awareness. However, self-awareness, especially amongst people, but especially amongst leaders, is actually in short supply. Another study that took over 17,000 people worldwide, they were involved in this study, found that only 19% of women executives and 4% of male executives actually exhibited the quality of self-awareness. So what does this mean for you? Well, if it's an incredibly important quality for leaders to have, and not many of them have it, this could be your leg up among leaders. And in fact, mindfulness and self-awareness, these 2 things are incredibly similar. And actually, mindfulness can help us train ourselves, just like we did in that first little exercise, to be more self-aware. On the screen here, I have the 2 definitions, and I'm going to read them out just so that you can see how incredibly similar these 2 things are. Self-awareness is a neutral mode that maintains self-reflectiveness in the midst of turbulent emotions. So just like that moment at the beginning where we asked ourselves, what's the state of my mind? What's actually happening in my mind right now? Maybe you just came out of a meeting that was incredibly stressful. You got really bad news. You are trying to overcome the biggest problem you've ever tried to overcome in your history, maybe in the organization you're working with. Self-awareness would be this neutral mode where you're able to reflect and say, oh, wow, I'm really worked up right now. I'm really worried. I'm maybe a little bit afraid. I'm feeling, nervous about this, anxious about this, in the midst of all those turbulent emotions, and aware of how those emotions are going to affect you moving forward, and maybe trying to manage them a little bit. Mindfulness is about paying attention on purpose in the present moment with an element of acceptance. So, in order for us to be self reflective of how we're feeling in the midst of these intense moments, we kind of have to pay attention on purpose. We kind of have to be in the present moment and accepting of where we're at in that moment. Mindfulness is really our ability to be aware in the present moment, aware of ourselves, what's happening, our thoughts, our feelings, aware of our habits, our strengths, our weaknesses, also aware of others, our environment. And the amazing thing about mindfulness is that it's actually a skill that we can train. When we train ourselves to be more mindful, we're automatically training this skill of self-awareness that, while it is imperative for leaders to have, is, as we saw, in short supply. We're now going to do a little bit of a mindfulness practice that I find is really the most impactful and the most helpful to cultivate self-awareness. What happens is, as humans, we have feelings. Hopefully that's nothing new that I'm teaching you. We have emotions, we have feelings, but those emotions, those feelings can make us compelled to act in a certain way. I teach privately a friend of mine, and she was reflecting to me yesterday. She said, I had this experience. My staff member was really frustrated with me. She was talking to another staff member, and I overheard her. The staff member didn't know that my friend could hear her, and she was complaining. And she said, my first instinct was to just get out of there, was to run, right? Stress response, flight, get out of there. My second response was, no, I have to go in there and tell her this is her job and really confront this, fight, get in an argument. She said, with the skills of mindfulness, I was able to pause. I noticed I wanted to run away from the problem. I noticed then I wanted to fight the problem. And instead, I reflected on my own awareness of maybe where I had fallen short for this staff member. And I prepared myself. I took some deep breaths. I thought about what I wanted to say, and I went and had a conversation with her that turned out really well. She said, I learned a lot about my employee. My employee felt supported. And she said, I really felt like I showed up as a leader in that moment instead of running away or just, putting my foot down in that situation. So this self check-in we're going to do is going to help us become aware of those tendencies to flight, to fight, to do all these things that might not help us show up as the best leader we can be. So go ahead and find that comfortable seated position again, a little bit taller spine, maybe rolling the shoulders back, maybe planting the feet on the ground. And I'll guide you through this short self check-in, helping us to cultivate this essential leadership quality of self-awareness. You can close your eyes. If that's uncomfortable for whatever reason, soften the gaze of your eyes downward away from the screen and just listen to my instructions. Let's take 3 thoughtful breaths to invite our mind into the present moment. Paying attention as your breath comes in and as it comes out. And let's begin this check-in with the mind, just as we did earlier. Notice what's happening in your own mind right now. What thoughts are present in your mind? Is the mind busy, calm, distracted, or focused? Maybe find one word that describes the state of your own mind right now. building this skill of reflecting and becoming aware of your own mind, self-awareness. Once we check in with the mind, we can check in with our emotions. Humans are feeling beings, so I want you to notice now, are there any emotions that are present for you right here in this moment? Usually the body will tell us if there's an emotion. Maybe there's a heaviness of the heart. Maybe that's the feeling of sadness. Maybe there's knots in our belly. Maybe that's a feeling of anxiety. Maybe there's heat in the face and tension in the jaw. Maybe there's anger. Can you become aware in the present moment to any feelings that are here? So we check in with the mind, we check in with the heart, our emotions, and finally, let's just check in with the body. Just notice how your body's feeling right now. Is there tension anywhere in your body? And if so, where? Do you notice maybe tiredness in the body or energy? Through sensation, is the body communicating any needs to you? Maybe you notice, oh, my mouth is really dry. I haven't drank water, only coffee this morning. Maybe you notice, oh, I'm actually really hungry. I totally skipped breakfast and lunch, forgot to take care of myself. Checking in with the body. And then coming back to the breath, paying attention to 3 more breaths in this present moment. And then when you're ready, you can begin to blink the eyes open. So perhaps during that practice, you became aware of something about yourself that you weren't aware of before you actually started paying attention. A simple practice like this is also really helpful, very simply, for sleeping. And if we're sleeping better, that probably will make us a better leader as well. Frankly, it'll make us a better human because we'll be rested, we'll be refueled, it will result in us making better decisions, being more focused, developing that self-awareness, maybe being kinder to each other. So when I think about self-awareness, I love this quote. The moment you can see the raging river, that might be the intensity of the stress you're feeling or the anger about something happening. The moment you can see the raging river means you are already rising above it. Often, when we're feeling really intense things as a result of the stresses in our lives, we react to them, right? We react to those emotions, just like the story of my friend. We run away or we confront it. We don't make wise decisions that we're proud of later. So, this practice of mindfulness, we're being able to observe and become self-aware of what's happening inside of us and hopefully make some better and wiser, more strategic decisions moving forward. One more way I'd like us to look at self-awareness here is a really simple practice of journaling. So I would love for you, if you'd like to use a real pen and paper, to grab yourself a notebook or just a scrap piece of paper and a pen. Of course, you can always open up a word processing, program on your computer if you'd rather type it out. But I'm going to give you a couple of prompts today, and we're going to do some self-reflective journaling to cultivate self-awareness. Journaling, while it might sound kind of silly or you might think, I don't need to journal, really, it's about discovering what's in your mind that isn't already in clear and conscious view. So as we do this, we create more self-awareness. We notice our assumptions, our perspectives, our challenges. So the first journaling prompt I'd love for you to spend just about a minute writing is my strengths are. My strengths are. So go ahead. I'm going to give you about a minute. And the goal here is really just to keep your pen moving. My strengths are. Maybe you start writing, I don't know what my strengths are. I'm not sure. Oh, that makes me feel kind of doubtful of myself. You can even write that. My strengths are. Go ahead and take about the next minute to journal about this. Bring some of those thoughts out into clear, conscious view. And if you're just thinking about it, doesn't quite do the trick. It's the writing that gets the thoughts out onto the page. Take another 30 seconds. My strengths are, again, even if you're just writing, I don't know what my strengths are. I've never known what my strengths are. I thought they were this, and then even that is self-awareness. Okay, one more prompt. You might be able to guess where we're going here. My weaknesses are. My weaknesses are. Get that pen moving, even if all you're writing is, I don't know. Something eventually will surface. You might be pulling it out from the depths of your mind and your awareness, and then being able to see it clearly. This is self-awareness. My weaknesses are. You might write down a weakness and then start to write about how it feels to acknowledge that. My weaknesses are. Cultivating this skill of self-awareness that is so important for leaders, yet in short supply. Okay. So maybe already in those couple minutes, maybe you wrote down something that you thought, I have never acknowledged that before. I never noticed that before. Where did that thought come from? It was deeply embedded in my mind, but I excavated it out, and now I'm looking at it clearly, and that is self-awareness. Is journaling useful? I'm pretty sure there's probably a group of folks on this call that decided not to do this, but it's not really worth it. And so I wanted to tell you why it is useful, how we know it's useful. There was actually a study done of laid off professionals, and they were asked to write about their feelings for 5 days. That's it. 5 straight days, write about their feelings. Well, this group that were asked to write, to journal for 5 days, they found new jobs at a much higher rate than the people who were in the non-writing control group, right? That's the way research works. If you're going to study something, you have to have a control group. So they had some laid off professionals who they didn't ask to do that writing, and the folks who did the journaling found jobs at a much higher rate. And I've actually got the statistics here. After 8 months, 64% found jobs in the writing group versus only 27 in the control group. 64% versus 27%. That's more than a 40-point difference from the group that wrote to the control group. For perspective, I'm not a researcher, you may not be either. When research is done and papers are written on studies, in order to publish a paper on your findings, you have to have at least a 3-point difference between the experimental group, the group that did the journaling, and the control group, the group that did not do the journaling. So that's all that's required is a 3-point difference in outcomes. This study had a 40-point difference, 40. This is sharpening your axe, right? You may think, I don't want to write about my feelings. I don't want to write about my strengths and weaknesses. This is silly. I should work on the tangible skills that I need as a leader. Maybe I'm leading a sales team. I should work on my sales skills. Maybe I'm leading you're thinking you need to work on those hard skills, which might be true, but you also need these foundational skills. Working on your self-awareness, again, is like sharpening that axe, taking time out to reflect, to build self-awareness so that you can be a more strategic leader. Okay, so that's the first quality of a mindful leader, that mindfulness helps us to cultivate self-awareness. The second one is that mindful leaders have this ability to self-regulate. Self-regulate. And I kind of touched on this earlier, but I want to dig into it a little bit more. Self-regulation is when we are able to effectively calm ourselves in intense moments. And if I know one thing to be true, especially after navigating the last couple of years, no matter who you are, you will go through stressful times, right? You will have times in your life, seasons in your life that are going to test you, that are going to bring you to your knees, that are going to ask you, what are you made of? You might be going through a season of your life like this right now, personally, professionally, maybe both. Stress in our lives, if you're a human being on planet Earth, stress is unavoidable. But that stress doesn't have to dictate our lives, right? We can self regulate to help ourselves move through these stressful times with more ease. And that's really what I think a mindful leader can do. Why is life so stressful? Why is stress unavoidable in life? Don't we all have this idea that, oh, if I could only be at a place where, I didn't have to stress about whatever it is on any given day, we think life would be just perfect. But the truth about life is that it is always changing. In mindfulness, this is a concept that is taught that's called impermanence. Impermanence. And this image here, I think, is the best depiction of impermanence, one of the best I've ever seen. Impermanence just means that everything on planet Earth, everything you know, everything you don't know about, you, the desk you're sitting at, the chair you're sitting in, the home, the office you're in, the plants on your shelf, the books, everything that you have, everything that you know begins, changes over time, and at some point will cease to exist. Everything. Every single thing. And I would even challenge you, I challenge every audience I speak to. Can you tell me one thing that doesn't follow these rules? One thing that doesn't have a beginning, continue and change in the middle, and an end. So we could say that the nature of life is change. The nature of work is change. And to go back to stress being unavoidable, well, how do we as humans navigate change? If the nature of life is to change, well, the nature of human beings is to resist and struggle with change, isn't it? We really struggle. There's a quote that says we're not sad because the flower wilts and dies. We're sad because we expected it not to wilt and die. The nature of life is change, and the nature of people is to resist change. So this is the world we live in. This is the personal world we live in, the workplace world we live in. Things change and it causes stress for ourselves. And this is why being a mindful leader means that you can self-regulate. This is the power of being able to self-regulate in those stressful times, that you can calm yourself. Why would you want to be able to self-regulate, calm yourself? Well, maybe it'll feel good for you. That's probably one motivating factor. You're not going to be so frantic and frazzled and stressed, but also there are things called mirror neurons that as a leader, you need to be so aware of. If you've never heard about this before, please do some investigating into this beyond our session, because it is going to make such a difference in the way you lead. Mirror neurons, they're in our brain, they're in every single human being's brain, and they cause us to mimic feelings, actions, and sensations of another person. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I was a child who watched America's Funniest Home Videos. What happens every time you see somebody get hurt? If you're younger than me, think like a fail video on YouTube. What do we do when somebody gets hurt? We cringe, right? Somebody gets hurt, we see a funny video and we're like, oh, we cringe. That's our mirror neurons at work. There's also been studies where you take two people and you say, one person, smile as big as you can, never stop smiling. The other person, don't smile ever. Most people you try to do this exercise with, the person who was told not to smile can't help but smile. Mirror neurons. They call this emotional contagion. So what are the implications of this as a leader, right? The way you show up is going to cause the folks you lead to mimic those feelings. They're going to feel the way you feel. They're going to act the way you act. They're going to they're going to have those same sensations. If you're frantic and stressed and frazzled, chances are, because of mirror neurons, your team is going to feel that way too. And in fact, the implications of this mirror neuron effect in a leadership position is even greater, because emotional contagion, right? Contagious emotions, that multiplies in a leadership position. It basically means it's the old cliche, lead by example. People will do what you do, not what you say you do. So when you're able to self-regulate, when you're able to manage your stress, manage your emotions, your team will be more likely to do that. When you and your team are feeling less stress, you're probably in a more positive and optimistic mindset. And when you show up positively and your team shows up positively, we find in research that the whole team is more creative. They problem solve better. They work together more efficiently. This book, also a must read for any leader. This is The Happiness Advantage, how a positive brain fuels success in work and life. And mindfulness is one of the key things he talks about in this book. Practicing mindfulness with your team. This is what I do on a daily basis. I teach teams how to be more mindful at work. Practicing mindfulness with your team helps you to self-regulate, bring more positivity and optimism to the workplace, and achieve better results. If we can't self-regulate, we're probably going to be in the stress response the majority of the time, because again, the nature of life is to change, and the nature of people is to resist that change and be stressed out over it, right? So we're going to be in that stressed out state. What happens when we're stressed out and we can't self-regulate? We often react to stressors. And a reaction is the opposite of a response, right? It's like if you're in traffic and someone cuts you off. A reaction would be honking your horn, rolling down the window, flipping the bird, yelling some obscenities at that person, right? Where a response is going to look very, very different. A reaction often escalates a situation further and makes things worse. Mindfulness can help us learn how to self-regulate so that we can respond and not react when we're in that stressful experience. And there's such a big difference between a reaction and a response, and we're going to practice creating a response in a moment. But I want you to think about a reaction as something that is quick. You're often going to react without thinking it through. It usually comes from a place of tension and aggression. Yeah. Are you thinking already of a time when you recently reacted? I know I've reacted when maybe an hour later I go, oh, I wish I didn't say that. I wish I didn't do that. That made things so much worse. That's usually the snowball effect from a reaction. On the other hand, a response is often more thought out. It's usually a little more calm. It usually takes more time because we have to self-regulate. We have to calm ourselves from that intense stress response before we can respond instead of react. So the example I'll give hopefully is one we can most of us relate to, is just getting an email with bad news, or getting an email from a coworker that triggers you to get angry, right? So usually if we're in that reaction state, if we can't self-regulate and we get that email and it triggers all this anger in it, when we're in that state, we're going to hit reply, we're going to type out a nasty response, we're going to hit send, all before we've even stopped and taken a breath, right? Where if we wanted to cultivate a response to that triggering email, we might have to read it once, read it another time. We might have to think about, where is this person maybe coming from? Can I put myself in their shoes? We might have to take a little walk around the block and just do some deep breathing and calm ourselves. Might need to drink some water. We might need to think it through and think, how can I, right? It takes more time. But first, we need that self-awareness. We need to go back to that first piece and have the self-awareness to go, oh, wow, I'm really worked up right now. And I'm aware if I act on this anger, this is not going to turn out well. And that's the story I was speaking to you about my friend, right? She was really aware. Oh, I'm really triggered. I want to run away. I want to fight it. Oh, I'm seeing this all happen. Self-regulate. So that's what we're going to practice right now. So you have the self-awareness to notice you're worked up, then you self-regulate, then you calm yourself and develop a response strategy. Let's go ahead and practice this right now. And before we do this technique, what I want you to think of, and maybe you've already come up with one in your mind as I was speaking, think of a time in your life when you reacted. So this could be, my example of getting that email with bad news or getting that email that just makes you angry or frustrated. It could be you were in a meeting and somebody said something that just made you really angry and tense, right? It could be an example of being in traffic. It might not be work related at all. Go ahead and pick one, maybe that you can think of that's pretty recent, right? Pretty timely, something that maybe happened. If you have something from today, great, or the last week. Good news is, life will give you many opportunities to practice this because stress is unavoidable, right? So think of your moment when you reacted, and now we're going to do this simple mindfulness practice, and we're going to practice developing a response. So again, the invitation here is to sit tall, shoulders down the back, maybe feet on the ground. And again, you can close your eyes, or if you'd like, you can just soften your gaze downward away from the screen. Let's take one deep breath, just feeling the breath come in, feeling the breath come out, and allowing your body to relax into the surface of the chair. So as you sit, I want you to bring to mind this moment when you reacted. Maybe mentally just imagine that you're back in that situation. And we're going to move through this practice to self-regulate so that we can develop a response. So as you imagine that you're back in that moment when you reacted, we can take the first two steps of this technique. The first step is to stop. Hit the brakes. Ideally, before you react, you stop. You might imagine it's kind of like you're watching a movie and all of a sudden you hit pause. You stop yourself from reacting. And in that moment that you stop or pause, you can take the second step, which is to breathe. So go ahead and take a couple of deep breaths here, just drawing the breath all the way down, maybe even feeling the belly rise with your breath. Letting it go. Deep breathing is a really simple way to soothe the body, to start to calm the nervous system. So these first two steps, in a moment of a reaction, we stop and we breathe. A couple more deep breaths. Now that we've stopped and we've breathed, the third step is to notice. Go ahead and notice, become self-aware of what you are feeling. Just like we did in that check-in, you might notice what emotions are present and you might even name them. Is it anger? Is it fear? Do you feel defensive? Do you feel hurt? Noticing what you're feeling in this moment. Continuing with those deep breaths. The fourth step is to reflect. And particularly, I want you to reflect on the perspective of somebody else who was in this situation with you. And there may have been one other person or multiple in this moment, but pick one and just reflect on what their perspective of this moment might be. What do you imagine they might be thinking or feeling? Can you, even for the next few breaths, pop yourself in their shoes? Maybe getting a different perspective on this situation. And finally, we'll move to the last step, which is to respond. Go ahead and take a few breaths to consider what might be the best possible way for you to respond in this moment. What response will create the best outcome for you, for anybody else in this situation with you? Noticing maybe how this response you're cultivating is quite different than your original reaction. Come back to the breath, take a couple more deep breaths. And when you're ready, you can blink the eyes open. So, with this simple practice, 5 steps, which I'll remind you of in a moment, this moment to pause, to reflect, to self regulate, imagine the conflict and the stress that could be avoided if even half the people on our planet could access this ability to self regulate in times of stress. So the first step, remember, is to stop, right? Kind of hit the brakes before you react, hit those brakes. In the moment when you hit the brakes, you give yourself an opportunity to breathe. Often in moments of stress, we're holding the breath. It's short and shallow up in the chest. It's triggering our stress response. So we want to start to soothe the body and the nervous system with deep breaths. Then we can notice, right? Go back to that first step of self-awareness. What am I feeling right now? And how is that maybe compelling me to take this reaction that's going to have some deleterious effects? Reflect. What might other people be thinking in this moment? What are their thoughts and feelings? Can I take that into consideration too, instead of only seeing my very limited perspective? And then respond. If you are open to sharing, I'd invite you into the chat to reflect on that exercise and share maybe how your response differed from your reaction. This is really about self-regulation. It's not about suppressing our feelings or avoiding them. It's becoming skilled at navigating and experiencing our emotions wisely so that we can work through them and still remain a supportive, engaged, and strategic leader. I want to share an example of a mindful leader here. This woman's name is Padmasri Warrior. She's the former Chief Technology and Strategic Officer at Cisco Systems. She was also named by Forbes as one of the 100 most powerful women in the world. Love that for her. She also sits on the boards of Microsoft and Spotify. And despite being incredibly busy, as you can assume based on those credentials I shared, she practices mindfulness for 20 minutes a day. She told the New York Times back in 2012 that taking the time to practice mindfulness and unplug actually helps her manage everything she needs to do in her world. She says it's like a reboot for your brain and your soul, and she says it makes her so much calmer when she's responding to emails. So this second quality of mindful leaders, this ability to self-regulate, is helpful because we can remember that you can't stop the waves of life. You can't stop the stresses that are coming your way, but you can use mindfulness to learn to surf them with a little bit more ease and grace. So we've got mindful leaders that have self-awareness. We've got mindful leaders who can self-regulate during times of stress. The final thing I want to share today is the fact that mindful leaders have compassion. And we might not think of compassion as a quality that should be focused on in the workplace, right? This kind of traditional workplace. We might think compassion isn't needed there. It's too fluffy, it's too touchy-feely to have in business. But actually, research shows that workplaces that are compassionate have a higher employee retention. Shocking that humans want to stick around longer when you're treating them as humans. And when you can keep your employees around longer, when you can retain them, that actually benefits your company's bottom line, right? Think of all the knowledge that they carry with them, and you don't have to keep training new people over and over. Also, people who have more compassion, it's found that they experience less stress. They take less stress leave and sick leave from work, and they're also more satisfied with their work. And these are all things you can look up on your own if you want to Google them, the research, but I pulled a couple pieces here from Forbes and from Stanford News. It's pretty fascinating, the effect that compassion has in the workplace. So, what is compassion and how do you cultivate more of it? Compassion is a very human experience. And compassion is really just about having a sense of concern for other beings and having this concern for other humans that you want them to be well, you want them to be happy, you don't want them to suffer or struggle. Compassion is really connecting to your and other people's humanity, right? It's seeing people's humanity beyond their job title, beyond their job number, beyond their tasks that they do on a daily basis. And as a leader, I think, being compassionate might mean sharing your own vulnerabilities. We did those journaling pieces of my strengths are, my weaknesses are. Maybe part of compassion is being really transparent with your team. Hey, this is my weakness, and this is where I actually need help. Who's really good at this? Who can step up and support me here? As leaders, we don't know everything. We don't have all of the answers, and that's okay. So it might be sharing that with your team. It might also be your step forward in compassion, might be connecting with your colleagues and your teammates on a level that goes beyond work, learning about their hobbies, their families, what they care about, their goals, what they want to do in the future, their dreams that they have for their career and their life. When we know more about each other's humanity, we can't help but care more for each other. We can't help but want to see each other succeed more in life. Also, going back to that book around the happiness advantage, if you want your team to be happier and produce better results at work, studies have shown that the happiest people ever measured by science, and you can apparently measure somebody's brain and see that they're happy, the happiest people ever measured were focusing on this quality of compassion. So if you want to get the benefits from a really positive workplace and team, practicing compassion is going to be huge. Now, compassion is pretty easy for us to cultivate for people who are like us, right? If I run into another person, another female, white female who's mid-30s, who has short brown hair, who, likes yoga, it's easy for me to have compassion for her because she's like me. The tricky thing that we bump into a lot as humans is finding compassion for people who are different than us, who look different from us, who believe different things from us, who have different opinions, who maybe are kind of hard for us to get along with. So what about compassion for other people? And what about cultivating a team in which you have compassion, not just for the people like you, for the people who are different than you? So we're going to practice this skill. This is one of my favorite techniques to practice. And again, some might think it's touchy and feely for work, and I think it's really, really powerful. I want you to bring to mind right now, before we do this exercise, somebody who you work with, who you kind of have a hard time getting along with. Maybe they look a lot different than you. Maybe they think a lot different than you. Maybe you tend to butt heads in meetings, in your strategies, in your decisions, in your goals. Probably somebody is coming to mind for you. And we're going to do this just a couple minute mindfulness practice to cultivate compassion for this person too. Okay, when you're ready, finding that tall, comfortable seat, lengthening the spine, either casting your gaze down from the screen or closing the eyes. Take a couple of breaths. And bring this person to mind. Imagine them in your mind's eye. And very quickly, you might think of all the ways that they are different from you, that they are not like you. And I actually now want you to contemplate ways in which you are similar. And I'm going to just repeat some phrases here, and I want you to repeat these phrases just silently in your own mind as you think of this person. Instead of thinking of all the ways in which you're different, you can remember that just like me, this person wants to be happy. So you can silently repeat that phrase in your mind as you think of this person. Just like me, this person wants to be happy. Just like me, this person wants to be happy. Just like me, this person has encountered challenges and setbacks. Go ahead and repeat that phrase a few times silently. Just like me, this person has encountered challenges and setbacks. Just like me, this person has encountered challenges and setbacks. And just like me, this person has people in their life that care about them and who they care about. Just like me, this person has people in their life who care about them and who they care about. And let's send this person some thoughts of compassion. Thinking about this person, you can silently repeat, may you be happy. May you be happy. May you be healthy. Sending this person these thoughts, cultivating this compassion for this human. May you be healthy. And finally, may you be at ease. May you be at ease. And maybe today there's a bit of resistance to finding compassion for this person, and that's okay because it is ultimately a practice. Let's take a couple more breaths here. And when you're ready, you can blink the eyes open. Maybe you notice you feel a little bit kinder to this person. So remembering our shared humanity is really important when it comes to compassion. And again, just like that response strategy, like imagine the differences in so many things, but the one thing that comes to mind is like our political landscape. Imagine if people were practicing more compassion. I think if there's one thing the world needs right now, that is it. I would encourage you to turn that practice into something I call a mindful moment. So you can incorporate this into your day at any time. And I love to incorporate this one, before heading into a meeting or a phone call or any sort of interaction you're going to have with this person who's challenging to you. Take those moments before the phone call, before the meeting to remind yourself of your shared humanity, to start to call up your ability to be compassionate to their humanity, just like you. And, the last thing around compassion is just to remember that, the last 2 years have been difficult, but even beyond that, just life is not easy, right? Life and work are tricky. People are going through things all the time that we don't know about, and we're all coping differently. So to be able to approach others and even ourselves with more compassion and more care in those challenging times can help us all be happier and more peaceful as we continue to navigate the unpredictability of life. So, one last thing I forgot I wanted to share this is just this phrase. Sometimes when I notice I'm being tough on myself, or when I'm being really critical of somebody else, or I'm finding it hard to connect with compassion, I remember this little phrase, how human of you, or how human of me. Let's say somebody makes a mistake and it really affects my day and it really makes me angry. I'll sometimes think, how human of you, and how human of me. I've made mistakes too. It's like a little simple way I find to connect to compassion in the moment. How human of me, how human of you. So I hope that this session maybe has opened your eyes to the way that mindfulness can really support you as a leader, can help you to set an example of this self-awareness, of this ability to self-regulate, to calm ourselves and nourish ourselves during times of stress, and to practice and cultivate the skill of compassion, and how all of those can make a massive difference for your own experience as a leader and the people that you lead as well. Ultimately, a leader is one who not only knows the way, but also goes the way and shows the way. So practicing these techniques for yourself will help them ripple out into the people that you lead. I would be thrilled to remain connected with you. I am on social media platforms. Would love to hear from you there. And I want to give a big thanks out to the team today for inviting me for this webinar. And I'm happy to open it up to some questions